Obviously, because of the conflict, they had been pushed out. And I see them starting to carry dead bodies into this facility that became like a makeshift morgue. And I'm thinking, Uncle, you need to help me over here now, right?
Look, of my wasiya portion, there's a certain portion that I want to give to an organization like Awqaf SA. I want to place it into a Waqf. How can they feel secure that the money that they are investing into these kind of Waqf solutions and into these projects are actually going to go out to the projects that they are kind of allocated for?
Looking at the immediate need of the community. Can you imagine how powerful an instrument that is to transform society? And not just Muslim society, but the entire South African society.
Like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any new releases. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the Campus Dialogues, a Muslim Views production in affiliation with Muslim Fin Family Office. Muslim Fin Family Office, building trust, preserving wealth, empowering generations. I'm your host Ali Sali, and we're back this evening with my co-host Siraj Buzik. This evening we got a very interesting episode for you. We're talking about Waqf and specifically dealing with Awqaf SA. Mickaeel Collier, the CEO of Awqaf SA, is in the studio this evening. And we want to understand what is Waqf, how does it work, and how can more people get involved. Siraj, how are you this evening?
Alaikum salam, Ali. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. How are you
Another
doing?
week, another podcast.
That's
Always
right.
good to be back in the studio. And like you said, yes, today we're honored to have Mickaeel Collier, the CEO of Awqaf South Africa. He leads the organization's endowment-driven approach, investing capital and using only the income to fund education, social development, and long-term community upliftment. He's authored the organization's 2024-2025 CEO report, and it's been featured publicly as CEO in interviews and community conversations about leadership, legacy, and sustainable impact. Mickaeel, Jazakallah, shukran for joining us. We're so happy to have you on the show.
Shukran for having us. It's a real pleasure and honor. Thanks.
Mickaeel, before we dive into policy and programs, who are you beyond the title? What anchors you personally in this mission of perpetual impact?
Sure, it's a loaded question. So I'll try as best as possible to answer that. I think it's something that is within our DNA. My family, particularly my father, my mother, they were social and political activists. My father was very heavily involved in the fight against the anti-apartheid struggle. He was detained, he was arrested, shared a cell with Dalla Umar at Victor Verster. And I think I was about 4 or 5 years old when he was arrested. He was a teacher at Heathfield High School, but also the fastest 100 and 200 meter athlete in Africa.
Oh, wow.
So don't look at me.
That's impressive.
Previously I got in trouble at home because I said that I didn't inherit my father's genes. So, we always lived a life of political consciousness, activism through social initiatives, through sporting initiatives, through community-driven type projects. I recall as a youngster having attended myself, my sister attended political rallies. My second name is Yasser. Because of the Palestinian struggle, I was named after Yasser Arafat at the time. And my sister's name is Layla Khalid. So her second name was giving expression and meaning to the freedom fighter, Layla Khalid, the Palestinian freedom fighter. So I think it's deeply entrenched within our DNA, as I said, and our family structures, so to say. And I went to school at a very young age. my kids were joking that I was 4 years old in grade 1, as we used to call it, sub A, and I turned 5 at the end of the year. So they would joke that, you know, I would still come home and have to make my own bottle. So when I got to high school, I think I was about 12 years old. And I attended South Peninsula High School, SP. And then we formed the Islamic Students Movement. It was dormant, and we resuscitated it. So from a very young age, 12 years old, I was already involved with various community-type projects. And then we formed various other youth groups, the Muslim Youth Forum, where we created an association of high schools across the Western Cape, forming, you know, a type of a network of Islamic youth institutions. And when I got to university, the Muslim Students Association, the MSAs, were basically defunct. They had Islamic societies, and each one had a different type of Islamic society within the Western Cape, but also nationally. And a mentor of mine, Wada Khanfar, who ended up becoming the general director of Al Jazeera televisions, he got a few of us together, and we resuscitated with Yusuf Muhammad and a few others the Muslim Students Associations across the campuses. And alhamdulillah, I'm very proud to say that that legacy is still continuing today. And you have MSAs now across so many different universities working together. So that's in a nutshell up until that point. And I had a very interesting university career, if I could say. We were still active, and you know, students tend to be very active, and we act very dynamically, and we don't think of consequences sometimes. So we had several protest demonstrations at UCT, including a demonstration and a march to the Kaplan Center. And the Deputy Vice Chancellor at the time said that, you know, if this march is going to become raucous, and you know, you're going to be expelled from university. So I said, don't worry, we are peaceful people. We need to express, you know, our opposition to what is currently taking place. Well, at that time, to Palestine. And I think it was around the 50th anniversary of the founding of the illegitimate state of Israel. And we went to Kaplan Center, and they said, no burning of flags. So we said, no, we agree with that, no burning of flags, and we won't do that. But then we had the flag, and we gave it to Yusuf. I told Yusuf, you in the middle of this march, because what we intended to do was, to open up the flag, and because we were met with opposition. So we were met with opposition from students from the Zionist Association at UCT, the Kaplan Center, and we told them, you need to come and fetch this flag because we don't recognize it. And eventually they didn't appreciate the fact that we asked them to collect their own flag. And yeah, there was like a little bit of tense moments over there. And eventually we dropped the flag on the floor and we marched on. And my student card was taken. And I had to appeal the whole process, and, you know, anyway, I did graduate at the end of the day. But these were things that, you know, we were very active and passionate about. And then about a year later, I had an opportunity to go to Kosovo during the wartime. And I went from South Africa to Turkey and met with an organization that we have very close to at the moment, still IHH, so, you know, International Humanitarian Institution. And they took me from Istanbul to Macedonia, and from Macedonia I was supposed to meet the team and go into Kosovo. And the border had just opened, and it was being protected or manned by a joint force of United Nations soldiers. And lo and behold, when we get to Macedonia, I miss the team, the Turkish team that I'm supposed to go with. And anyway, a guy from Islamic Relief France, and I'm about 18 years old at the time. And a guy from France, Islamic Relief France, says, don't worry, you can drive with me until you get your team. And anyway, we go, and we get to the border, and this is like mind-blowing, because this is like what you see on the movies, you know, with soldiers and tanks and helicopters and all that stuff going on there. And anyway, I say, right, I at least got an older guy with me. And he takes me in, and we wait at the border, and anyway, eventually we get in. And he takes me to a place where I'm supposed to meet the team, only to discover that because of the fluidity of the situation, the team moved on already. So now I'm 18 years old and I'm alone, and he drops me at this institution that I'm supposed to meet the guys. It was an Islamic center or school, and the team's not there. And he says, okay, I have to go. So I said, but what's going to happen to me? But while all of this is happening, the suburb or the town had just opened up. People were just starting to return. Obviously, because of the conflict, they had been pushed out. And I see them starting to carry dead bodies into this facility that became like a makeshift morgue. And I'm thinking, uncle, you need to help me over here now, right? And the man's words to me was, sorry, I can't take you with me because I need to go to wherever I need to go. So I said, but what's going to happen to me? And I'm checking these bodies coming through, and I'm like, you know, it's real.
Yeah.
And he says, Allah put you in this situation, and Allah's going to get you out of the situation. And he says, Salaam alaikum, and he goes. And I'm thinking to myself, what am I going to do over here now? Right? I don't know where the teams are. There's no cell phones, no way to connect to them. All that I have to do is to rely on the next group that's going to come through. And he was very right. It was probably one of the most difficult leadership lessons that he had taught me. I don't remember the guy's name because I'm sure my PTSD just blocked him out. I thought at that time, how can you do this to me? But anyway, as he drives off, about 4 or 5 students, youngsters, walk into the center. And I engage with them, we connect, and they say, don't worry, you can stay with us until your next team comes or until you meet your team. And that took about 2 or 3 days. And what was very profound and significant was that when I got to their home, they had also just walked into to their house for the first time in like maybe 6 or 8 months. And this guy breaks down and starts to cry because they had fled while their mother was busy baking a bread, and the bread was still on the stove. Right? And the reason why I'm narrating or telling you the story is because sometimes, you know, when we were young, you think you can change things very robustly and very physically, you know. And that was another very significant defining moment in my life because it showed you the destruction that war and violence causes. And it basically shows when you see the effects of what war and violence and destruction can cause, you'll see infrastructure like a road. A tank just comes by and it churns up that entire road, right? And you see the effect, the human psychological effect, having lived in a very violent environment. And to a large extent, that then shaped the next part of my life as to how do you move beyond that in order to build sustainable models. And it was very, I would say, psychologically impactful. It was really, when you see dead bodies and you smell a body that has been burnt, it was something that stood with me as an 18-year-old for a very long time. And I spent some time contemplating what is it that one can then contribute to society. You must remember, we were growing up in a period where it was a transition from the 1985s, 1990s, where people were fighting on the streets of South Africa, to a position where you're moving into a democracy or democratic dispensation, where you still had elements of violence, but you had an alternative way being formed and coming through. And I think all these experiences in your life shapes you for what role you play further in society. And then, you know, at about 22, I got married, graduated. I never succeeded with stripping me of my university degree. And got married, and within 2 months after that, I get invited to a meeting where this whole concept of sustainable development comes through. So coming from a background of political science and political economy, etc., this like sounded very niche and interesting to me to go. And we were invited to a meeting in Cape Town, and this whole issue of Waqf as a means of community sustainability was presented. And I'm like, this is actually, you know, something that is tangible, something that is workable, and something that we can implement. And almost 24, 25 years later, we're sitting now at a space where Awqaf South Africa has become not only a national organization, but also internationally recognized.
Absolutely. Mickaeel, I'm listening to your story and I'm really blown away almost. I was a bit taken aback there for a moment. What an amazing story. Shukran for sharing that with us. I'm still interested to know how you got out of that situation, but I think we'll get back to that. But, you know, in terms of Awqaf SA, you're right, you're absolutely right. It is internationally recognized and definitely a household name for South Africans and specifically the South African Muslim community. Now, this podcast tends to focus on Islamic finance and focus on, you know, advising the youth and the Muslim community on how to, you know, start to incorporate Islamic finance into their daily lives, of which Waqf is really, you know, should be seen as a big part, because, you know, when we think about Islamic inheritance, you know, there's that wasiya portion of what you can actually donate or give away to non-heirs, right? And in our planning with our clients, in many cases, we always have these conversations, and they'll say to us, okay, well, now, who do we actually give this money to, and how do we know that the organizations that we're giving our money to are actually going to be doing good with our money, right? So when it comes to the, you know, kind of the vision that Awqaf SA, Awqaf SA has, the vision and some of the, you know, some of the projects that you guys are involved in, that was the word that I was trying to get to. Just in terms of that, you know, where do you see Awqaf SA really making a difference? And, you know, what are some of the successes that you are most proud of so far?
So it's very interesting that you mentioned this whole notion of Islamic finance. Yeah. And what we have is where we view zakah and waqf as a component of Islamic social finance, right? We know that zakah is a very defined very defined parameters. So you have 8 categories of people that you support within various types of regulations that go around it, and also surrounding the individuals that have to pay zakah. So that's like very defined and very structured, and it's part of an article of faith. When you look at waqf is that voluntary donation. Voluntary in the sense that it's sustainable, because the concept of waqf stays. The capital or your donation, your asset that you donate, has to stay intact, right? We only spend the return of the investment. So, for example, I like to simplify the examples. You can't go to a masjid and take a brick out of that masjid. That masjid was built for a particular purpose, and it has to remain for that particular purpose that it was established. So similarly, when somebody donates to institutions like Waqf or for Waqf, your 100 rand that you donate has to be maintained from now until the end of time, and it has to grow. And we can only, for example, if you donate 100 rand to an education project that we have going, that 100 rand stays intact. We use the return of that investment. So say, for example, 10%, we're talking about a 10 rand that then gets plugged into supporting the education projects. And a portion of that investment also goes to recapitalizing your Waqf so that it grows, so that it outperforms inflation, and there is a steady growth in that. And when we looked at the model, firstly, it's not something that was humanly inspired. It was divinely inspired. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that loan to Allah a beautiful loan. And another verse, none of you will attain righteousness until you give of that which you love. And in the famous story of Abu Talha that comes to the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam after hearing that, it says, I have this beautiful garden and I'm dedicating it to the Ummah. And the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, thank you very much, but also use it for your family's use as well. So, it immediately opened up so many different permutations to what Waqf can be used. It could be used to preserve wealth, can be used to ensure that successive generations are also looked after. Then you have the well of Sayyidina Uthman. And what is very interesting about the well of Sayyidina Uthman and also the other type of campaigns that the Muslims donated towards was that in those expeditions that they went where Sayyidina Abu Bakr said, I'm giving all my wealth, or Sayyidina Uthman said, I'm giving so many camels, I'm giving so much towards infantry and the support. What they saw in those times is also opportunity to open up the doors to other people, right? So that the entire community succeeds in a growth mechanism, economic growth mechanism. So similarly, the Waqf system is there in order to ensure that there is, firstly, because of the sustainability of the fund and the fact that the capital never ever gets lost, and there's a regular annual return that is able to be used. Number one, can act as sustainable fund, but secondly, it also acts as an economic shock absorber. So during downtimes when the economy is struggling and people are under pressure, as we are currently experiencing now, the Waqf can plug that gap in order to ensure that there is something that, say for example, in our economic situation now, the donor base to somewhat is shrinking and the beneficiary base is increasing. Okay. So if you look at it in terms of sometimes with donations in zakah or sadaqah, etc., sometimes societies reach a point where either they have a surplus of the zakah, or it reaches a point where they are not able to collect sufficient zakah because of the economic conditions. Yeah. So when you looked at the point where zakah was very strong, the institution of zakah was strong, and people were actually looking where to give their zakah to, it was because they had the complementing Waqf institutions that were sustainable, that built society, that looked after, for example, in the Ottoman period, the state looked after two things. It looked after the judiciary and safety and security. Everything else was driven by community beneficial projects driven through the Waqf system. So there were Waqfs for hospitals, there were Waqfs for educational institutions, there were Waqfs for newly wedded couples who never had enough money to start their life together. So you'd go into a Waqf house, you would live in there for a period of time and then move on. There was even a Waqf that was established for domestic workers that break the cutlery and crockery of their employers. So you could go if you were afraid that madam's going to shout at you for breaking the stuff. They could go to that Waqf and get, a replacement.
Oh, wow.
So that they were protected from any sanction by the employees. So in essence, whatever, there was even Waqfs for animals, all right? So you'd still see in Turkey today, if you go into Istanbul, the main cities, you'll see there are people who are feeding animals on the street. Often those are from Waqfs that the state had inherited, right? And it's still continuing. So the system was there in order to look at every positive social beneficial project that institutions, for example, or the categories of zakah couldn't address, right? So that's, I think, where we came in and we said we need to revive this model, because one of the first institutions that was destroyed when the colonialists took over Muslim lands was the institution of Waqf. In India, it was destroyed because the Sultan, they were killing his soldiers, but he had income that was being generated each year from the Waqfs that they had. So what did he do? He employed mercenaries from Ethiopia and from Africa, etc. To the extent that there's still a community in India that was trapped, descendants of mercenaries who were trapped after the British had finally defeated the Sultan. So they had nowhere else to go, and they stayed there, right? And they looked like typical Africans. But they speak Indian, they speak Hindu, and they've assimilated into that society because, the world is interconnected in so many different ways. And that's one of, the stories of interconnection that caused this to come about. So the idea is that if we had an institution that is able to really, in a sustainable way, look after our communities, then we're building sustainability, we're building the ability to do future planning. Because, for example, like as Awqaf South Africa, most organizations are income depleting on their budget.
Yeah.
So when it comes to 2027, they've got to come back to the fundraising strategy in order to get to that. With the system of Waqf, you can project more or less what your rental income or your income from your assets is going to be. And you can then plan for 5 to 10 to 20 or 30 years even, because you're able to ensure that you can't lose the asset, you can't lose the capital, and you just have that potential to grow the investment even further.
Yeah. Now, Mickaeel, I think for many people and our listeners, when they think about Waqf, they just think about it as charity. But Waqf is different. It's institution building, like our massages, our schools, scholarships, and so forth. And I wanted to ask you, especially for new donors, how do you explain that concept of once-off charity, versus I would say endowment-based giving, to, for example, to a new donor?
So once again, a life story. Firstly, we see the benefit of the Waqf. We started off as an organization that had very little resources. We plowed in of our own resources in order to get the first property alongside with donors. Last year, Awqaf South Africa was able to fund 490 different organizations in a host of different activities. So we don't look at ourselves as people duplicating work. We look at ourselves as being the capacitators, the enablers, the catalysts of those people on the ground, organizations on the ground already doing work. So if I use a real life example, there was a gentleman that is part of an aged or frail care facility. And he went to try and get a few donations around the country. And he wasn't very successful, but he lived with somebody that was a very wealthy person and close to him. And that person asked him a question and said, how many months budget do you have? And he said, I've got about 2 to 3 months. I asked him, what does it cost you to run? So it was about 100,000 rand. Let's average it out. And when he left, he thought, okay, at least I'm going to get something tangible from this guy. And the guy gave him a nominal amount. And he was very disappointed. But that same person phoned us and said, I would like to donate, call it, I don't know the exact figures, but I'd like to donate R1 million. Let's round it off to that. For that particular purpose, to look after the frail and elders facility. Okay? So in that person's mind, if you're an engineer and you're going to Macro to buy a television, or if you're an architect or a businessman, your brain is wired in a particular way. Right? So an engineer is going to look at what components it has. An architect is going to look at the aesthetics and the design and the sleekness of it. A businessman is going to look at a Hisense, a Samsung, plays the same picture, right? But it's a 5,000 rand difference, for example. Yeah. So he's going to go to the Hisense because in his mind it makes more economic sense. So likewise, that businessman was looking at the model. He's thinking, I'm going to give you now 100,000 rand. In month 4, you're going to be in the same position. Whereas if you give into the Waqf, you know your R1 million is intact on a 10% return on average, right? You've got 100,000 rand from now until the end of time that institution will be dedicated that set amount of money on an annual basis. So at least 1 month would have been taken care of for the rest of eternity, because the nature of the Waqf, you cannot lose the capital. It has to grow, and you've got to use the returns on that investment for what the donor has specified. So it becomes a sovereign fund, if one looks at it in terms of economic principles. Becomes that sovereign fund, becomes that perpetual donation mechanism that institutions are able to continue. We did some very high-level cursory studies, and the South African Muslim community spends about close to, very conservatively, 2.5 billion rand every year on social projects. So soup kitchens, food parcels, education, medical interventions. But every year we spend that 2.5 billion. So imagine if we had to have a mechanism where we had to bank the 2.5 billion just for 1 year, right? And you place it into an endowment like a Waqf, right? That is divinely inspired, that has to outlive you, right? It's planting the seeds for the next generations and generations to come, right? It's growing, and it's looking at the immediate need of the community. Can you imagine how powerful an instrument that is to transform society? And not just Muslim society, but the entire South African society. So some people have a political philosophy where they say that it's radical economic transformation or radical economic redistribution. So that means you're going to go to somebody that has a lot of money, and you're going to take from there and distribute it to those that don't have. But what that does is it unbalances and destabilizes the society. Whereas the Waqf system, if we appeal and we tap into the understanding of a donor that your money is intact, this is the benefit that it has to you spiritually, right? Because Jannah has different levels, so you're going to climb each time somebody benefits you, you're going to climb in Jannah, right? You're going to get on a speed express elevator to get to the top, right? And at the same time, it outlives and it benefits society, in perpetuity. So if we are able to have that, then it doesn't become a radical economic distribution, but it becomes a sustainable economic redistribution of wealth without destabilizing society.
Now, Mickaeel, listening to you speak, that's so motivating. And what's interesting is that this is never really explained, in a public setting. And I think, us coming from, the banking world and the financial world, being in business and industry for some time, it's interesting that we're hearing this maybe in some cases, and I'm sure for the audience for the first time. And how powerful would that be if you're saying now the Muslim community donates about through various organizations 2.5 billion. If they were just to bank that, I mean, just think about that. They were to bank that just 1 year, the amount of difference that could do within the larger South African community would be immense.
No, definitely. And I mean, we see it because as an institution that is involved with so many different projects, just on our cataract project, where we do free cataract surgeries, we've done close to about 18,000 free cataract surgeries, alongside with our partners like Islamic Medical Association. There's a Pakistani Doctors Association that's operating in South Africa. We have a partnership with the Red Cross and the Red Crescent. So if we look at those 18,000, it has such a lot of different permutations as well. Because we live, besides the fact that we're saving the state money, right? A cataract, you guys are in the financial world, right? So you'll be able to calculate it quickly. Cataract costs government anything between 15 and 20,000 rand. If you're in the private sector, it could cost even much more than that per eye. So when we do that, 18,000 times, call it 20, I don't know what that maths is. That's a real, very real saving to the budget of the country, right? Just in terms of health. But even more so, we have a phenomenon in South Africa where grandparents tend to look after their grandchildren, because parents either have a migratory pattern of work or they work 9 to 5, and it becomes so difficult for them to look after their own children. So what it means is that when the grandparent has that cataract, something that takes about 15 minutes to rectify, if the conditions are correct, right? And it's an in and out. Within 2 days, 3 days, you have normal sight again. But that grandparent that is meant to look after that child now relies on the child to look after them. So now the child doesn't go to school, right? So you have a dropout rate, high dropout rate because of that. The grandparent may be 50, 60 years old. You can still earn some form of an income. But because of a cataract that is covering your eye, it's thin film that covers your eye, you are now no longer economically viable option to employ. So it has so many different impacts. So now the child gets now a SASSA grant, and then the grandparent needs to get a disability grant included over and above, call it a pension, whatever. So if you take that real case scenario, what is the real saving to the economy? Just by somebody that's donating a once-off, maybe 20,000 rand for a cataract. Can you imagine the impact that your once-off donation or your monthly donation of 100 rand towards a project, bearing in mind that 100 rand stays intact, what that has really to transforming South African society.
And Mickaeel, like community needs are quite urgent, and endowment or Waqf is sort of long term. Does that create any tension in the sense that how do you balance long term investment discipline with immediate community needs?
So that's why you have the institution of Zakah, right? So we see Waqf and Zakah as complementing institutions. you have to have both. So the one looks after the immediate needs, and the other one looks after, as you said, the long-term sustainability needs. But even within that long-term sustainability, you have the potential to scale up a type of a Waqf that will look at the immediate needs of society, right? So you can open up a Waqf for anything that is, as I said, socially beneficial, right? So once you have something that is, for example, disaster relief or a food security Waqf, as the zakah looks after the immediate need, over a period of time, that food security Waqf will also grow, right? And once it grows and it reaches a point to be able to assist and secure a community so that they no longer become zakah dependable. And that's the principle of zakah. Our zakah institutions like SANZAF, who's our sister institution, says their motto is to move people from being zakah dependable to be zakah paying. Right? So if we have the complementing institutions working together, then we can really move beyond zakah as an obligation, but zakah and Waqf actually unlocking opportunities and new opportunities for people.
And Mickaeel, if you were to advise, let's say, business people, right, wanting to now look at organizations like, look, of my wasiya portion, there's a certain portion that I want to give to an organization like Awqaf SA, I want to pledge it into a Waqf. How can they feel secure that the money that they are investing into these kind of Waqf solutions and into these projects are actually going to go out to the projects that they are kind of allocated for?
Sure. So there's two aspects maybe to answering your question. Firstly, we'd encourage people not to wait for their wasiya, because that's only on your death.
Yes.
Achieve rewards, right? Beneficial rewards in your lifetime. Donate to a project that you're passionate about, and in your lifetime you were able to see that the impact of your work, as opposed to waiting only. Whilst both are good, one is obviously encouraged more. Because Allah may grant you a very long life, that you live to 80 or 90 years old, and then only at that age does the community start benefiting.
Yeah.
So do both, firstly. Secondly, that we pride ourselves, for example, like through Awqaf South Africa, we pride ourselves with very accurate reporting. So we have full disclosure on our financials, where we invest the money, how the system works, what the return is used for. We're migrating also, and by the way, we are audited by Deloitte, so it's very credible institutions also that play a part in it. We belong to not only national associations, but also international associations that drive Waqf. So I think the credibility of Awqaf South Africa is there. The further donor confidence is, we are currently migrating to each donor within Awqaf South Africa currently has a donor account with their own reference number. So you'll be able to phone our offices at any time to say, I'm Mr. Sali, I've donated 5,000 Rand in the year 2000, what is my Waqf sitting at? Can you give me an account? And very quickly the office will be able to give you that. We're migrating now in the next, it's almost completed, whereby you would have your own online account. So you'd be able to type your username and password in, and you'll be able to go into the account statement that's in your name, like a bank account, right? And it will say, Mr. Sali gave 5,000 Rand to education, Mr. Abrams 5,000 to healthcare, etc., but only 100 Rand to orphans care, right? Okay. And your Waqf has grown by so much, that's the return of the investment, and that's what we have spent the money on. So out of the whole general Waqf, sorry, but you only contributed 0.01%. So that also gives the level of donor confidence, right? But it also encourages people to top up their Waqf accounts. Then within Awqaf South Africa, we have two different types of Waqf systems that we run. The first, or categories I should rather say. The first is where it is a designated Waqf, right? And then we have the second one, which is a discretionary Waqf. So it's non-discretionary, designated, and discretionary. When it comes to designated or non-discretionary, you can say, I'm Ihsan, I want to have a Waqf. There's 10,000 Rand. I want to donate this Waqf for education, to train up practitioners at university who will be following a path of Islamic finance. So it becomes very specific. You can go right down to the bottom as to what type of a person, where the person comes from, etc. And as the mutawallis or the custodians, we are duty bound to enforce, firstly by our accountability to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but then secondly also as our fiduciary responsibility as laid out in the trust deed, to fulfill your particular request. Then you have a discretionary Waqf, where you say, I'm giving 100,000 Rand as a donation, and you determine as the mutawallis what the need of the community is at that particular point in time, right? So I'll give you another real life example, because that's how we learn.
Stories are great.
The stories are great. So a few years ago, we were beneficiaries of a very large Waqf for boreholes that came from a donor out of the UAE, out of Dubai. So the problem that they had was, at the time that the man made the Waqf for, specifically for boreholes, Dubai had no water infrastructure, right? So now over time, you saw the country has grown, the most modernized country in the world. Now we don't need boreholes anymore. So what do we do? So they needed then to have gone to their Waqf institutions to say, we have a problem. The man specified for boreholes. What do we do? And then they said, what you have to do now is to look at another country that is water insecure. And they then contacted Awqaf South Africa and then asked us, would we accept the donation from the Baghlaf Waqf? And because we have a need here, we accepted the man's intention to ensure that his endowment, his Waqf is fulfilled. And that has now generated support to a number of boreholes. I think the figure is maybe about, out of that Baghlaf Waqf particularly, it's about 35 to 40 different boreholes that we contributed towards sinking boreholes in different communities across South Africa. So when you become very specific, the needs of society changes over time. When you have a discretionary type of donation, then you are free to and flexible to have it. Then it goes so specific in terms of what the Waqf can be used for, that the founder of Bank of Al-Raji, right, he decided, I'm taking all of my wealth and I'm donating it to a Waqf, right? But his family are the beneficiaries of the Waqf as well, right? So he is seeing the benefits that he's deriving in his lifetime, because he's not any less wealthier, right? All his needs are still taken care of. And really, how much do you need in this world, right? Once you've reached a certain level of comfort, I think, sometimes we need to realize enough is enough. And alhamdulillah, this brother realized that. But his Waqf now looks after his entire family and also the projects that he donated his money to. But he didn't wait for his deathbed when certain conditions are no longer within his control, for example, how many thirds a son gets or a daughter gets and a wife and parents, etc., right, or the wasiya portion only, he did it in his lifetime. So that is, the levels of accountability that people can be held to and should be held to within Islamic institutions, particularly financial institutions.
Now, Mickaeel, you mentioned about the gentleman or the donor from the UAE and the owner of the bank, and it's probably easy to have this misconception that Waqf is only for the wealthy. But in practice, it's actually collective, accessible, such powerful, when consistent. So how can ordinary families, youth, businesses participate meaningfully, to help scale Awqaf SA's, impact?
So that's a very good question. So we embarked on a campaign called the Power of 100,
Okay.
right, where we're suggesting or encouraging families on a monthly basis to donate 100 Rand into the Waqf.
Mm-hmm.
Your 100 Rand is banked, it's secured, it grows, and if we have 100,000 families doing that or individuals doing that, it is very easy to do, right? It doesn't even have to be 100 Rand. It could be even an amount that is less. The idea is that we need to follow in the prophetic example of establishing Waqf, establishing community endowments, and it is documented that every single Sahaba, male and female, had a Waqf of some sort or the other, right? Because the rewards are so perpetual that, it doesn't matter how much you give, right, or how little you give, but the institution is meant to encourage giving. Because once we give, we return. We get a return spiritually, etc. But one of my very impactful mentors and father to me, Uncle Arun Kala, mentioned that his father taught him a concept, right? Was that he said, don't close your fist, right? Because you will only retain what is in that fist. Mm-hmm. But if you open your hand, people can take, but Allah can also give, right? So the idea is that we need to continue giving, right? Once you give, and another real life example, we had a pledge line one year. I think it was still on the previous channel, ITV. And that year we managed to raise something like, I think we broke history on tele pledges. We raised about 26 or 27 million Rand on that evening. But whilst people were giving R1 million and the du'as were coming in, hey, it's R1 million and this and that, 100,000, 50,000. We had a lady that he went to her was watching the pledge line at her neighbor's house, an elderly lady. And she used that person's phone and she phoned in. And she asked us, I don't have a lot of money, but can I give her 5 Rand? And there wasn't a dry eye in that back office taking that phone call, right? Because that 5 Rand to that person was probably almost 90% of what disposable income they have. So at the end of the day, it's about starting the process of giving, right? For yourself, but also it benefits society. And this isn't, as I said, it's not an institution that was man-made or thought of. It's divinely inspired. It's prophetically driven by the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So it's something that worked, and history has proven that it worked. And we need to ensure that we continue to make it work, inshallah.
Inshallah, I mean, Mickaeel, just to end off, for the youth out there, the youngsters, 18-year-olds, even younger than that, now looking at you, looking up to you as a mentor and saying, look at Mickaeel from a teenager, very young age, 12, 18, he went to Kosovo, did some amazing things. At 22, started Awqaf SA. I mean, look at what he's done with his life. Look at how many people he's helped. May Allah continue to, bless you, inshallah. I mean, but for those, the youth that's now looking at this show and saying, I want to do those things. I want to, kind of follow in Mickaeel's footsteps, or I want to do something similar. How can I also get involved? How can I make a difference? What advice do you have to them?
So firstly, I think within our community structure and our psyche, it's the elderly generation or the seniors. The problem is we do not create enough spaces for youth to emerge. And if we look back to the prophetic model of the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, most of the Sahaba, the first people to become Muslim, the first community of Muslims, were youngsters. There were very few who were older than the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. There were few who were of his own age, but the majority were teenagers. And he created the space for them to emerge as leaders. Right? But there also has to be a willingness from a young person's understanding and outlook in life, is to say that I cannot only be a beneficiary of what my parents do for me, or what the school does for me, or what society does for me. And sometimes our youngsters have a level of entitlement without the responsibility, or the conscious responsibility, that I also need to be an active participant of societal change. So firstly, we need to create the spaces. Secondly, there are so many examples. Sultan Fatih, conqueror of Istanbul, was 12 years old and he became the Sultan. Right? And then he left the Sultanate back to his father, and at the age of 21, he had a plan from the age of 12 that he meticulously worked on in order to conquer Constantinople, today Istanbul. And meticulously he worked on that plan of action. Our youth have no excuses. We have the facilities available to us. Sometimes they have a very expensive iPhone 16, 17, I don't know what the latest one is, but it's used for Blockbuster. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, really, you have such a powerful tool in your hand. You'd be able to run your podcasts, broadcasting, etc., using a device like that. So it's the opportunities are available to the youth. You cannot wait for others to ensure that you're going to emerge. You need to actively create space for yourself, actively work on how I'm going to contribute to the betterment of society. And you can start in small things. We had a cricket tournament. Before the podcast, we were talking about cricket. And Awqaf South Africa established this youth cricket tournament. It's grown to become the biggest youth tournament I would say, in Africa. But what we did was the players who started off in the first year are no longer eligible to play. Okay. And we encourage them to take in the first year a little bit of responsibility of managing the process. Last year, they retired all of us as the old guard. Publicly, we didn't know what he does. They just said, we're taking over. Thank you for your service. They gave each of us a certificate. and they ran the tournament fantastically, better than what we could have done. Right? But they also had hiccups. And it's for us to support, be that safety net, because we had people who were our safety nets. So the one guy comes to me on the day of the tournament and says, Uncle, where's the tablets to do the scoring? So I said, Uncle, when did you know that you needed to have tablets for scoring? They said 2 months ago. So I turned my back, I went home and I said, figure it out. And you had to figure it out. Right? So it's about creating those spaces for them also to emerge. But knowing that the majority of our youth in today's day and age, they have access to so many avenues where they can contribute to society. They go to, again, speaking of our community, they have access to education. They have challenges, and that's why Awqaf has 85,000 students on the mathematics program intervention. But you can take the horse to the water, but you need to make it drink. So my message to the youth is that they are the drivers of society. Youth are the ones that have the energy designed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have that energy. And they need to utilize that energy in order to channel it, not to the blockbuster, what's the other one that they play, that farming game, whatever, but use the tools that you have at your disposal. And often there's something that as adults, but particularly youth, fail on. I was in a meeting one day, I was very fortunate, sat in a meeting with President Erdogan from Turkey. And he was saying that there are stages that we need to work through. Firstly, we need to read as youngsters. Then we need to think about what we've read, right? What we've engaged with, whether it's reading or social media, whatever. So whatever knowledge we have, we've got to think about it. Then secondly, we've got to implement. But most people fail on the final step, and that is to conclude, right? So once you've implemented, you need to see something through. That doesn't become a half-baked project. That you either die in the job or you succeed in completing the job, right? And that is my message to the youth. Do have those steps. Because, Ibn Khaldun, maybe just to conclude, he speaks about the cyclical nature of history. And that, societies start off at a point, ends off, declines, and then someone else takes over, right? But the nature of where we are within that cycle is so important. So what happens is, firstly, Allah gives you blessings, ni'mah, right? Then you become complacent because of the blessings that you have. The access to the phone, the television, the services that is available to you. So you become complacent. Once you reach complacency, the next step is destruction. So don't ever become complacent. Always know that you need to strive, move on, work harder and better in order to not only have a better life for yourself, but knowing that you are part of a piece of a bigger society.
Mickaeel Collier, CEO of Awqaf SA, words of wisdom. Shukran so much. May Allah continue to bless you, inshallah. May you grow from strength to strength. And shukran for sharing all of that insights into the organization with us. I think the audience has really learned quite a bit, Siraj.
No, definitely. I think it's a topic, the divine model of Waqf is a topic that doesn't get spoken enough about. So we definitely look forward to having you back on the show. You can take that as a formal invitation, inshallah. But jazakallah, shukran so much for the time, the opportunity to discuss this, the model of Waqf.
And there you have it, guys. Finish what you started. That's Mickaeel Collier's advice to you. And please give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, hit the bell icon, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.